On this episode of the podcast, I have with me Mark Shasha. He is the head of security at Braze. We're going to be talking first about how his company culture is a little bit different than most. The CEO and CTO still are actively involved in coding and they still commit code, and really interested to kind of explore how that impacts him, his hiring, and the overall culture. Mark, thanks for being on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you. I'm really excited to be here.
Absolutely. Excited to have you on. And just to set a little context for everyone so people know who you are and what Braze does, let's kick that off and go from there.
Sure. So my name is Mark. I'm the head of security at Braze. I manage the cybersecurity program as well as the security engineering practice within our organization. I come from an offensive background. I had worked leading up the red team at jet.com, during sort of the Walmart transition. Before that, I was doing your offensive consulting and penetration testing and auditing. And then I also worked for a offensive consultancy in Israel before I came to Braze. Braze is a company that helps companies connect better with their customers. In order to do that, we sell a SaaS platform that gets installed sort of as an SDK within mobile applications, web applications, on Roku devices, on like all sorts of technology that our customers have, in order to integrate with that and then be able to provide sort of a better experience for their customers. So, result of this sort of our leadership, John and Bill, they're both developers. They both come from development backgrounds, and they're still definitely hands-on when it comes to the tech and development processes, especially John, our CTO. He's still committing, which is puts us in an incredible scenario where I report to John, and being able to have those pragmatic conversations when it comes to technical implementation for security products or for systems, or especially for policy, right? SLAs becomes much easier, and we get to have more frank technical conversations around those things. I think it's a really cool spot to be in. Definitely more fun than having to do, like serious cost benefit analysis and watering down and anecdotes and that sort of stuff, which, in my opinion, being in that type of environment could sort of hinder the process of developing out a formalized, like a bleeding edge security process, especially in an organization that is working with modern technologies only.
So you've been there, about a year, I guess?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So when you were going through the interview process and you're kind of talking to, the CTO, and he's, talking about how active he is in still coding and being involved in that side of the house, I guess, what was your take originally? Obviously, you hadn't come into the fold. You hadn't seen some of how the company works, but what was your initial thoughts when you heard that?
When I interviewed, I was definitely taken aback by the depth of technical discussion that I was going into when John was interviewing me. I didn't understand fully how deep it was. Sometimes you get sold the dream during interviews. And I was definitely, as I was with a lot of my other interviews, skeptical, like, oh, is he really pushing to prod? Right? But it turns out that's the case. Not only is our leadership, and not just John, but all of our tech leadership, familiar with our application from a product side, they also understand it fully from an engineering perspective. And that makes things go a lot smoother, considerably smoother. I mean, we're a sizey org, with a mature product. This is not, like a Wild West 2-year-old startup that's still trying to develop its place in the world. This product has been around for 10 years. We've had a lot of time to formalize our systems, to formalize how we scale. And there's a lot of intricacy to how that works. And having leadership that fully understands that and is able to operate with a, like product in mind is great. But I didn't know going in how deep it was. But now that I do, I definitely, I'm happy that that's the case. It's made my life a lot easier, especially coming from environments where, it might have not been the case, or I was reporting into different types of organizations, not into directly security orgs, or in my consulting, seeing organizations that also have security organizations that do not have that sort of luxury. I can see the, like stark difference between the way people work here and the way people work elsewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm just curious, like if you're going to contrast this maybe with a previous organization, we have to name names, but How was the culture different knowing that top down, that there's such a deep involvement with the coding process still? How does it affect the actual culture deeper into the IC levels?
So I think that everyone feels that from an engineering perspective, everyone's on the same page looking upwards completely when it comes to implementation. When it comes to, like architecture review and architecture design, even in pre-production and planning phases, everybody understands that if we have a clear, concise goal from a technical perspective, that is going to be very easily translated into a set of approvals, from management. And not only that, that could come pretty quickly compared to a situation where there's got to be a lot of explaining and there's got to be a lot of business use case, drawing very thin lines between different parts of the product and profit and cost. That type of stuff at our organization happens completely organically. It happens in a way that, engineers enjoy, right? Because it's just going to other engineers. Although John is a CTO, he's a CTO first, but it is nice to know that having those types of conversations is simple and it is pragmatic above all, pragmatic from a security and pragmatic from an engineering standpoint. And the ICs definitely benefit from it. And our engineers definitely benefit from it.
Yeah, obviously, you guys are a nice sized company. I'm sure he has other responsibilities, but when it comes to your one on ones, right, and you're reporting into him, and your reviews, whatever the frequency is, I don't know what the frequency is. It could be weekly, monthly, quarterly, whatever that would be. How does that structure seem different than, let's say, another company where there's a little bit bigger disconnect, or maybe the CTO is simply functioning as nothing but what a CTO typically does?
I spend much less time explaining things, right? The conversation is efficient from managing an engineering team, from an engineering goals perspective. Giving updates and sort of doing my upwards reporting is easy because it's exactly what I had just discussed with my engineers. It's exactly what maybe I just implemented. And I'm not having to, draw parallels and giant cost benefit analysis and, making it's incredible effort, or it was incredible effort in other situations to sort of get points across with technical complex topics. Now it's efficient. I'm speaking to another engineer and having those discussions as, engineers, everybody's pretty honest about their own skill sets and asking the right kinds of questions. And we're all used to that type of process. Things go much quicker. I'm able to convey a lot more information faster and more accurately in my one-on-ones, which are biweekly.
Biweekly. There you go. That's actually pretty good frequency. So I was just curious on the flip side. So it seems like it's part of your culture, and then it must also impact the way you operate with the engineers on your team.
Yeah, definitely. I come from an engineering background, like fairly recently. I'm assuming all or a lot of managers in the security space came from engineering background, but I am able to provide guidance and have those types of discussions again very efficiently, taking after sort of what John does. And John's got an incredible work ethic as well, and I think it's really nice to be able to be inspired by that and then bring that sort of into my team and bring sort of his processes into my team. But having those discussions, and my engineers will tell you that technical discussion takes up 90% of our sort of communications during our stand-ups. It's all technical discussions, unless we're talking about compliance. But
It's a whole different can of worms there. But so when you're actually looking at then hiring people into the team, right, and you're looking to grow, those people on the team, how are you then kind of helping them familiarize themselves with the culture? Because obviously some people are going to come in completely different culture. They're not used to this top-down engineering focus, possibly. Maybe it's a little bit more siloed. Maybe there's more bureaucracy. It sounds like you guys are more, let's talk about the engineering side of it, because everyone in the org actually, from the CTO, CEO down, marches to that tune. How do new people assimilate to that?
It's interesting to sort of explain that, yes, you have a mature product. We have a mature code base. And we do have those processes, right? Where, it's not YOLO push to prod whenever you want. There's things that need to get done, just like in a, like formalized, effective development organization. But also, we are not so concerned with the things that they might have had to do in the past, which is that non-technical explanation. There is product teams and business development teams and research teams within our organization that do a really great job of creating explanations and use cases. And from an engineering perspective, if you get an engineer that came from an org where the onus was on them to do those types of things, I really like communicating like, hey, you get to really focus on science here, right? You really get to focus on the technical aspect. And it's not that those processes don't exist, but you're going to find it way easier to operate than you did in a classical org.
Much easier to sell the opportunity now that you know it's not just all talk, right? I mean, it's actual validity to the culture and everything now that you've been a part of it.
Yeah, and this is really important to security people. There's a large swath of the security industry came from consulting, where those types of processes, you never really had to deal with them, right? Because you're consulting for the org that had the process in place. You weren't the one consuming or being a part. Maybe you would consult on those processes, but you would never be experiencing them. So we have a lot of security professionals, incredible security professionals that come from the consulting space, or even that come from an internal consulting function within a larger organization, like a penetration testing team at a very large company, where they don't have to deal with those types of processes. And those types of individuals might have difficulty going to organizations where there is that like super heavy, rigid, like one after the other, like management kill chain, where within this organization, that stuff is just focused around engineering to begin with. It wasn't an afterthought. It's not some other business process that's been molded in, to a technical or engineering process. It's all there and it's light, and it's not something we think about a lot, right? It's not something that I have to give much thought to. It just happens.
I'm just curious. You mentioned something there about the consulting background, and I guess a lot of security engineers do come from a consulting background. Just from your perspective of obviously interviewing people and hiring people to your team, that adjustment of actually being a part of the process, owning the process versus providing recommendations, providing insight, providing even some of the implementation, but not having the skin in it. How is that a change for people that are coming in with that kind of background?
Yeah, not having the skin in it is definitely was a big change for me, at least. The transition out of consulting for me was jarring, especially going to a very process-oriented organization. And I wanted to leave consulting because I wanted to have the skin in it, right, at the time. I was working with these really effective organizations, right, with these teams that really worked well together, and they were working towards some common goal, and they believed in the values of their organization. And consulting, it's like, what's the values of your organization, right? That's the values of the organization that you're consulting for. And I wanted to be a part of that. And becoming effective in that type of role took some getting used to, especially in a really process-oriented organization. What I do see when I'm hiring is I'm not completely abating those types of backgrounds like other organizations would, where say, oh, he's been consulting for 15 years. It's going to be really difficult to get him to work on a blue team. I think it's pretty fun to care about something, to take things personally when it's your product, when you're defending it. When it's your infrastructure, your developers, your, like the employees within your organization, and protecting them, protecting the assets, and protecting the customers that are, like supporting your business. Taking those things personally and having skin in the game makes an individual more effective. I think it is. And it's fun. It's very rewarding. You don't particularly get that. In consulting, you're really defending the honor of your consulting firm, right? Essentially at the end of the day. While within an organization, you have a lot more people to care about, which is always fun.
So yeah, I mean, absolutely. And I think when you're now in-house, some of the design changes, right? The architecture changes, you're owning that. So in the case of, I know Braze, you guys are cloud first, fully containerized environment. Any decision you make, you're going to have to own. Like, you can't make the recommendation because it sounds like it could be the right fit. You got to make the recommendation because you're going to own that, whatever that end decision is, right?
Oh yeah. You definitely have to be a little more careful. And you have to be more tactical because you're implementing it, right? If you want to make a recommendation for a security process, product, policy, you're implementing it, right? It's going to be your butt at the end of the day. If something goes wrong or someone gets blocked or someone gets angry, right? It's going to be your problem, right? And then it goes on the other way too. In consulting, it's very easy to just be like, accept risk, abate, whatever, oh, it's not part of the compliance framework. So, like that's out of the scope. There's nothing that's out of scope. Your scope is the whole org, right? When you work in place. So you have to take a lot more into consideration when doing risk assessments, when prioritizing. And those things are challenging, especially in like a cloud-only organization, a SaaS-heavy organization, where those things aren't clearly laid out. On-prem environments have been around since the dawn of man, since the Big Bang happened. Active Directory has been a thing. People know how to manage that stuff. People have written books on it. People have made it their whole lives' work to make it as easy as possible for somebody to get it to 80% secure. Now we're getting into environments where your life is like decision-making. Everybody's kind of looking at each other like, well, it's my first time too. And we're all trying to figure, the community as a whole is trying to figure this type of stuff out together. That's moving towards containerization. That's moving towards ops-heavy containerization outside of cloud-native deployment strategies, right? That type of stuff, although it's been around, and there are definitely people who are super great at it. The verdict's not out. The book hasn't been written yet. We're still writing it. And making those types of decisions and also having your booty on the line, the booty of the organization, that is fun, keeps things a little spicy. A little bit of risk never hurt nobody.
Spicy is a good way to put it. And I've always viewed engineering as you're using the same tools, but it is almost a brand new innovation or implementation of it, right? Everyone uses Kubernetes, everyone uses Docker, but the way you guys use it, it's just a little bit different, right? Like it's different enough where it's unique. Like, I mean, it's going to be rare to find your exact architecture and your process and your setup at another company. And I think that's where like traditional engineering is, hey, we're going to build a bridge. Well, I mean, we have a good idea of some of the science behind it. We can reverse engineer it and actually, use some basic principles to create that. Versus what you're doing, some of it is untested, like you mentioned, no one's written the book, no one's done it. And to kind of go back to the culture side of it, when you're looking to sit down to have those discussions of, hey, here's a change or here's a recommendation, how do you guys handle that conversation? How is that brought up? How do you guys view, let's say a shift in architecture design?
There's a couple things there, definitely a couple good points to bring up. With the verdict not being out and having to make those decisions, you have to look at not only what other organizations have done, because implementations can be fairly similar, especially when it comes to standard deployment, infrastructure as code and deployment pipelines, and even CI and CD stuff. That stuff can be pretty straightforward. Moving, again, orgs in the same space. Obviously, Google's going to have their own incredibly complex thing that they're doing, and then the 30-person, development team is going to be doing, maybe something a little less sophisticated. But when you get into the 1 to 10,000 person companies, SaaS companies or selling some software product, you have to get a good idea of what's going on. So I have open communication with a lot of other people, engineers in my positions through like professional groups and some other stuff that we have. And we sort of definitely share openly like, hey, I'm trying to do this. I'm really worried about that. What are you guys doing? So figuring that stuff out is important. Now, having those conversations internally, when there isn't like a, Alex from Microsoft says you got to shut this flag off on this one service to make it safer, right? When you don't have that sort of definitive outlook on things and you're trying to make architectural changes or you're trying to manipulate and, advise on a project or a product before it's even, like the development's even there, before the idea is even being formulated, you need to come with some evidence that that type of strategy has worked in the past. Doesn't even have to be on the same system. Doesn't even have to be on the same type of technology. But you got to say, hey, I'm adapting what has been done here for this type of system. And I'm going to bring it here. Really stupid, simple. If you're doing authentication, if you're rolling it yourself, please don't. But let's say there's a case where you have to do that. You need to be able to say that I want you to implement MFA, multi-factor. Right? And then they say, well, why do you want us to do that? It makes us safer. Well, that doesn't make much sense. You say, well, look at this example of this authentication schema where they implemented it and it did make them safer. We're going to draw parallels. We're going to say that that's happening. Again, that's a really base level example. At Braze, we do not roll our own authentication schemas. Please, nobody do that. But in that case, it's good to have those types of discussions internally about somebody else did this, or we're going to, combine these multiple, controls from different systems, and we want to do that here.
Continuous adaptation, right? So I guess, some people are innovating, some people are adopting and adapting. But I think that's what keeps technology moving forward, is seeing that little bit of difference of how you could apply something slightly differently, what impacts it brings to an org. I think that's got to be the exciting part of, joining a company like Braze, where, you guys are, working in a pretty modern environment and it's non-classical. So you're going to be tested, I'm assuming.
Definitely, especially when we get into scale, which Braze has got a lot of, well over the 1 billion MAU, well over at this stage. Dealing with that does not fit into the regular zeitgeist of, like security schema. Even very simple stuff like you need to log traffic. Okay. You can't. When it's that big, it's useless, regardless if you can do it or not. If you had unlimited money, what value are you going to get from logging all of that? So now you got to sort of move in and be more tactical in figuring out where the watering holes are for the types of attacks that you're going to be experiencing. Look at historical data on what you have experienced before, what other orgs have experienced within the same space, if you can get that information from threat feeds, and then, be a little more tactical with your recommendations. It becomes difficult because sometimes, like the book, load management, monitoring, protect, detect, respond, recover, doesn't apply 100% of the time in these types of environments. We're not the only environment to be coming up against this issue. There's a lot of organizations, super cool, new, effective orgs that are scaling like crazy, that are looking at these security products that are available, or these, like security systems that people have implemented, and being like, this is the industry standard and it does not work for us. How are we going to compensate for that? And then having those discussions, that's where the fun is. No security engineer thinks that implementing is a great time. It's necessary, right? Vulnerability management, vulnerability scanning is necessary, but that's not the fun. The fun is making determinations about vulnerability scanning on systems that cannot accept classical products and services and systems for doing those kinds of things.
That's actually a really interesting point. I was actually going to ask you, so non-classical, we're looking at solving problems slightly differently than somebody has maybe at a different org. When it comes to actually hiring, right? And this is probably the biggest challenge, where candidates always feel like, I've got the base skill set. Obviously, I've done X, Y, and Z. I've done it someplace else. It should translate. And then it's like, well, it doesn't work for us. We're passing. When it comes to hiring for your team, or, just generally speaking, how important is context versus maybe some of the more, fundamentals that you're looking for that can translate into the company, into the org?
Definitely hiring, a little difficult, right? I think all security managers would agree with me that it is not the easiest thing to hire for security positions at this time or ever. I don't think it was ever easy. I don't know, maybe it was. Some people told me it was a long time ago, but I don't particularly believe that. The context portion is definitely a cool discussion. What does context mean? What do you look for? Somebody who's worked at a SaaS company, also in AWS, also in Azure, also in GCP, also in whatever, that's implemented these kinds of different things. Like, where are you going to find those people? There's like 6 of them, right? That's too specific. You need to definitely broaden and draw those parallels, just like you would do in an architecture review for a new type of product or a new type of system. You say, okay, this person has spent their life securing a .NET production environment. Okay, I want to extract out of my conversation with them how that is relevant to the systems that I have. I'm going to explain to them my stack. I'm going to explain to them what's going on internally. I'm going to explain to them how data flows, how the organization handles things, how the engineering was done, what our architecture is like. And then I'm going to see what they think is the most relevant portion of what they did, even if they've never seen that environment before. Even if they've never touched it, they've never read about it, I want to know what's relevant. Because the tools are similar enough. The difference between, and again, this is a contested topic, but the difference between the major cloud providers who are provisioning to compute resources at the end of the day, regardless of what that looks like and how far you're abstracted from them, that bit is learnable. But what is experience, what you get when you bring somebody on, is their experience in implementing types of controls, even if it's in a different environment. So when I'm looking for people, I'm not looking for a AWS certified with every letter after their name person who's published research in AWS virtualization and security. Although that'd be great. I would definitely love to talk to you if you're listening to this and you have that type of experience. What's more likely to happen is I will definitely have a chat with somebody who's had tangential experience, who's had experience doing implementation on a production environment. And I want to see how I can take that and adapt them and provide them with the resources and tools. We're an ops heavy company. We have a sizey DevOps team, and they really know what they're doing. And they have some really serious experience when it comes to compute, right? And I know I have the resources to sort of maybe get a little hand-holding in the beginning when it comes to learning, what's the syntax for the AWS API? Or how exactly does Azure structure that type of NSG? Those types of things. But once they know that, those are the tools they need to take their previous experience, apply it to Braze, make it safer. And that's what we look for in the interviews.
Awesome, man. I think that was a fantastic kind of explanation, because I think a lot of people who look for work, look for jobs, they always have a bit of a gap in understanding how that translates. So I think that's actually really great insight. It's been fantastic having you on the podcast, kind of chatted through a few things Braze related, and I think you guys are doing some exciting stuff.
Great. Thank you. It was awesome being here.
Absolutely. If somebody wants to reach out, what's the best avenue? LinkedIn? If somebody wants to ask further questions or wants to just talk to you more about what you talked about on the podcast?
Yeah, you can feel free to drop me a line on LinkedIn, Mark Shasha on LinkedIn, or on Twitter. I'm AYY_Sasha, SASHA. And if you're interested in Braze, feel free to drop me a line or check out our website, braze.com. And we have some job listings there for security engineers. And again, take what I said to heart. If you see that we're like a cloud first, like very modern application stack heavy organization, and you've got a lot of experience in something that is not that, I still want to talk to you. And if you're down to get into it and relearn a little bit of tooling, I want to have a conversation with you. I definitely want to get on the phone.
Absolutely. We'll include the links in the show notes. And if somebody's looking, Mark is hiring, and sounds like a pretty exciting company. That's it for this episode. We'll be back again. Another guest, different set of topics. Two things I always ask for. One is keep sending me kind of ideas that you guys want, to have podcasts around. We've been kind of formulating different guests to talk about these different things. I really appreciate it. And secondly, subscribe to the podcast. It's kind of just grown organically. We've not done much to talk about it, but people are listening. You guys are subscribing. So thank you for that, and continue to do that. We appreciate it. Until next time. Thanks.